is a mentor of mine. I've had a lot of amazing mentors over the years. And Mark, I would say, is one of the, he's in the top 2 or 3. I've searched the world over. I've searched the world over for mentors and for people who understand a lot about human connections with nature and human connections with each other. And I found one of the best. And this room should be 200 seat and more, but it's last minute, and y'all are really lucky. This man is a brilliant man and far undercut in terms of the due he gets in the world, but that's changing. And we're so grateful to have him here. He's an adopted brother of mine, older brother, and I'm so psyched. Yeah, I won't say much more. Well, I will say this. He founded, his credentials are 15 years ago or something, he founded a school up in Vermont called Vermont Wilderness School, which if you're in the nature movement at all, nature connection movement, you've probably heard of Vermont Wilderness School. It's had huge impacts. And every fall there's a huge rendezvous called the Art of Mentoring up in Vermont. And when I go there, it's a week-long experience where there's all generations. There's elders who meet at breakfast and they're talking about what it means to be an elder in culture. There's little kids who go out, and explore and come back with really magical songs and stories about fairies and things. And there's slightly older kids who go out and spend like one night out on the land. Then there's older kids who spend 2 nights out on the land as an experience. And then there's teenagers, boys and girls, who go out and spend the whole week by themselves out on the land with mentors. And we start together at the beginning of the week, about 200 people, and then we split off and go our different ways, and the adults are learning, and we come back at the end. And the experience of that is like an embodied feeling of what human life could be, when we're all watching out for each other. Ding.
The light goes on.
Every time a key topic is touched. I'm going to remember that.
And it's an amazing thing, It's an art project is basically what it is. And so why I say that is because this man is first and foremost an artist, which is why I like to have this talk here. He went to art school, and his work now, building human community, you could say, is this art. And he's truly an artist. So please welcome Mark Morey.
You got a clap for me too. All right. Thank you.
Well, so how many of you know Evan firsthand? Awesome. How many are meeting Evan for the first time tonight? Great. Friends of friends, I'm guessing? Yeah. Imagine the burden. How old are you now?
28.
28. Imagine the burden of a 28-year-old who's questing for mentors who understand the essence of nature and culture. It's quite a load. But I know he comes from a long lineage of preachers, so it's part of his fate in life. Had a nice long talk with his dad, the preacher, this morning at lunch. So my name is Mark Morey, and I hail from Vermont. And you need to know that it's maple syrup season today.
Ooh.
Yeah,
Wow.
That's exactly right. I'm not there. And so you can tell this is an important event, or else I would be up there. And there's only one thing more important than maple syrup season, and that is a healthy future for the future generations. It's pretty much my mission in life. And as an artist, I was lucky to stumble across the idea that I could actually create my life like an artwork. How many people create their life like an artwork? So you're quick on the draw there. Interested in talking to you later?
Yeah. I'll see this weekend.
It's a new idea. What would it mean to create my life like an artwork? Full palette of opportunities and possibilities. Even beyond the limitation of what I think is possible. In fact, I might be the greatest limitation there is. Anyone get in their own way? Oh yes, good. Nice. Good one. So at least you know. Start. Now what are you going to do about it?
Get out of the way. So much fun if you can.
Spend a little too much time with Evan or myself and you'll start to see some changes. One of the great things about nature as a medium for creating your life like an artwork is nature itself is basically the one remaining thing that isn't made by human beings. That's kind of a no-duh statement, isn't it? But honestly, how many things are not, right? How many things are continually reflecting human thought and human ideas? So we're in a building right now that has a uniform floor and walls and temperatures and stairs and water. What?
I was like, yeah, kind of.
Yeah. I mean, this one actually is not up to code. It's a little more creative. I was in the bathroom. I can't see why. You know, it's not up to code.
You don't know that.
Chunk of the ceiling fell down. So these things, you know, they're not innocent. They're not innocent. And so what happens to human beings, our little children, who are always in uniform patterning going on? What happens to their possibility list of problem solving, right? If they never have to deal with changes in the environment, they never develop the ability to solve problems in that way. Does that make sense? It'd be like, oh, I don't know, putting them in a monoculture and saying, what skill sets are they going to develop? Well, they're going to develop the one skill set that handles the monoculture, right? So it could be like all one age or race or species of tree, right? And that's about as diverse as they'll get. Or we could, you know, up the ante a little bit and have them be part of intergenerational family, for example, or in an urban setting of cross-cultural relationships, or nature. And nature is very dynamic. It's so complex that we actually will never figure it out. Which is like a breath of fresh air, isn't it? Finally, something we can't know. At least pretend to know. There's I think, a human tendency to want to know the unknown. And that might be one of the tips around creating our life like an artwork, right there. One of the things that I get in my own way around is leveling everything and creating this known future for myself, as if the past will be the same as the future, and I keep orienting myself in that way. So for example, I continually go towards the same people that I'm comfortable with. I keep going towards the same foods that I'm comfortable with. I keep interacting with the same temperature on my thermostat, right? Now, you know, I'm sort of basically creating a little bubble for myself, and that has a feedback cycle to it. Now, if I go out into nature, how much control do I have over what's going on out there? None, right? So what's going to happen? It's going to grow me. It's going to grow me in all the ways that I have to adapt and change, and it starts to look like I have to be present every moment. I have to be awake and present every moment to the changes that are going on. And what's that do for my soul? What's that do for my well-being? There's like an electricity happening for me. Edge of my seat. Just the weather alone. Isn't the weather amazing? You know, one of the things that happens up in the Northeast is ice storms and wind storms. And what happens is trees get pruned by 40-mile-an-hour winds. You know, just old stuff just comes jangling down, and it just comes right across power lines. And then boom, entire neighborhoods are out of electricity. Refrigerator shuts down, the house becomes quiet, it's dark. You open up the fridge and the light doesn't go on. Then you shut it really quick and you think, oh my God, like, I have a finite amount of chill in there. What if, you know, how am I gonna, what do I want? It's like, and you think about it, you know? You know? Whereas, you know, when I got all the power in the world, it's like, let's see, pickles, ketchup, slice of bread, what do I want, you know? So the weather really causes me to be on my toes. I love that. It's very humbling. It's very powerful that way, you know. It's one of the few times I realize I'm not the top dog in reality. But I like to think I am. I like to pretend I'm on top of everything. But one thing that I've noticed is I was lucky as an artist to come across this early on in life. That I'm happier when I'm engaged in the present moment. I'm happier when I'm stimulated in nature to be alive. And I'm happier when I'm in an extended family environment. I'm happy in an intergenerational setting. I'm happier when things aren't actually predictable. Even though I wouldn't do that for myself, necessarily, left to my own devices, I start, you know, bubbling out. Anyone know what I'm talking about? Yeah, they're all nodding. I love this. It's like comfort zone, you know? And then what happens to the children in this equation? What happens to the children if all the adults just start to kind of comfort zone and bubble out? What's their future look like? What happens to them in their development? Any guesses?
They learn how to bubble.
What's that?
They learn how to bubble.
Yeah, they learn how to bubble. They kind of like, that's their new reality within the bubble of the adult bubble. And sometimes it can be kind of like a descending amount of resilience that happens over time. If some people are older in the room, they think back to the things that they dealt with as kids. When I went out the door, my parents actually had no idea where I went. And they didn't ask. And I would be gone for long distances. And the rule of thumb was basically within shouting distance, you know? Mark! You know, down through the neighborhoods, you know, and out in the back fields. And, you know, it would take like 10 of those to get me home. Now it's like, you know. You're like the dogs on the leash almost, right? It's a much shorter range of roaming room. What happens to the problem-solving ability of the child in that environment? We're growing adults from that, right? We're growing our adults. They're going to be our future leaders. They're going to be the ones taking care of us when we're elders. I think it could be, this is a radical statement, I think we could be producing the softest children that were ever made by human beings in the history of the planet right now. Who's got that thought? Anyone? All right, so you're concerned as well as I am, aren't you? So that's where this man comes in. You're lucky. I travel around the world talking with communities about these concerns. Because on the flip side of the concern is really a dream. And I think a human instinct to have resilience and well-being. Health, vitality, happiness, powerful relations, diversity of thinking and strategies, and ability to adapt and cope with change. I mean, it's really what I want. I don't like the training process, but it's really the result I want. You know what I mean? But so it's funner as a group. So having one of these in your neighborhood is still actually fairly rare, especially one of the level that Evan's participating at. He's done a lot of training by his young age. And in fact, he was so ahead of himself at one point, I said, we got to talk. Because he's talented. You know him, right? He's pretty talented. And so I said, you know, one thing that's going to be really important is to be anchored by older adults. Because, you know, I believe in the future generations, the younger. Future generations. I believe the younger generation is really the one that's going to make the great change. Somewhere between 15 and 25 right now. They're flexible, they're in the know, and they're all business right now. They need serious business. I know younger people who are choosing not to go to college and grow food instead. That's pretty radical. I mean, it's radical for my era, you know. My parents can't even imagine that. Why are they doing that? These are intelligent people. These are intelligent people. They could go to Ivy League schools and they're choosing to grow food. What's that saying? Someone better be paying attention. And they need land to do it. And they need guidance, and they need mentoring. So, you know, I see a talented young man like Evan, I say, you know, you're going to go farther if you're building a strong relationship with the older generations. So I made a deal with him, you know. I said, I'll have your back, you know, and I'll help you get where you want to go. And then you'll help me with your inspiration and enthusiasm and purposefulness, because I believe you're going to have ideas that I'm getting rigid around. I believe in that. Mm-hmm. So he challenges me all the time, constantly, keeps me on my toes. In fact, that's that training process I said I'm really not interested in, but I like the result. So I put myself around a lot of young people on a regular basis with a set of core routines. Listening, really listening, like not thinking what my answer is, but listening to what they have to say and letting it conflict with my worldview. Asking questions, challenging myself and others, taking risks. Taking risks as a core routine in general. Well, let's try it and review. Doing things with a collective mind is another core routine I have. So, you know, I grew up with a lot of independence and a lot of cultural norming around it's up to you to do your own independent thing out in the world, and like this linear line out into the world kind of thing. And I think that era is over. I think we're coming down to an era of much more local, interrelated relationships. So a core routine I have is practicing doing anything in some type of group process. So if I have a decision I need to make, I can make it myself. I run a sole proprietorship, single owner business. But I'll put together a team of people that I respect, and I'll say, what do you think about this decision? I want to start a cultural initiatives around teenage rites of passage. What do you think the best choice would be? And I lay out a scenario, and then I listen to all their different ideas, and I make sure my team is diverse. Men, women, older, younger. And I get a new center on the whole thing. And then, like sovereign, you know, like a king, I'll say, I think that's the best answer. It's not necessarily what I would have come up with. And that collective intelligence, right, starts to mirror something like nature in its diversity. As if we're all different types of species that are working towards something holistic. So that's one of my routines as well. Also, having the global and the personal in mind is another routine I have. Because, you ever heard this expression, the micro reflects the macro? So my personal ecology inside myself is like a whole universe of landscapes, trees, animals, species, shadow, light, mountains, valleys, water, fire, wind and air, you know? You know what I'm talking about? The whole world in there. And then you have one of those too, and you have one of those too, right? And just attempting to make a connection between those worlds is a big deal. But I believe that what happens between two people is happening globally. And keeping that in mind is really important. So having the global and the personal in mind when walking in the world. How are my actions affecting the world? How are my actions in the world affecting you? Kind of consciousness around you could call it my conduct, how I walk in the world. So often when I talk about what's the benefit of nature connection or deep nature connection, you know, right off the bat it's about creating resiliency for our children because they're going to be healthier, happier, they're going to be more vital in their body, in their spirit, in their emotional intelligence, their problem solving, their social relationships. Right? Because they're going to be dealing with all the changes that are always going on. Then put them in a mentoring environment So that's just them alone. Put them in a mentoring environment of diverse ages. Like a village setting. The village. Now I secretly know most of the people in this room are hungry to be in a village again. Raise your hand if that's true. I knew that. I knew that. Because I've asked that question before around the world. There's this quiet hunger building for the village. I'm tired of trying to do this all myself. I'm tired of trying to run my family by myself. I long for community, whatever that is. I long for kinship. I long for deeper bonds than the temporal ones that come and go. Facebook's great, but you know, it only goes so far. You know what I mean? I want to connect on Facebook. So, how do we get that? Because, you know, left to my own devices, I just want to, you know, do my bubble thing. Commute, get in my car, my little space bubble, go to the job, hang out at my desk bubble, my phone bubble, back to my desk bubble, back in my car bubble, back in my house bubble, my chair bubble, or maybe my TV bubble, or my computer bubble, or maybe my book bubble. Not that you know anyone like that, but you know what I'm saying? Left to my own devices, that's what it looks like. My food bubble. Maybe my unhealthy food bubble. Because I'm not happy. Right? How do I provoke myself into diversity? Like nature? Well, this is where it gets to be like the artwork. Right? What if you were to design your life to be like nature? In all manners and respects. Forget the economy thing. I think that's like a red herring. It's like a distraction, that whole economy thing. Because people say, well, how are you going to get a job? How are you going to get a job doing that? Like that's, you know, you can't answer that one, then you might as well give it all up. No, I'm not listening, you know. Can't get a job? I'm not listening, you know. And when I was in college, you know, I dropped out and I wanted to go to art school. My parents were like, what kind of job are you going to get with that? Right? What kind of job are you going to get as an artist? Well, you could teach art, you know, kind of a thing. And I'm thinking, I'm not learning art to get a job. I'm reclaiming being a human being from something that is an inhuman design, where my soul's been cut and compartmentalized and packaged and wrapped. Unsatisfying. And I can see where that's going. And that's not a future for me. I'm not happy about that future. So, I took a risk, you know, and I jumped into a whole new world called, I'm going to fulfill my dreams in an unreasonable manner. I'm an unreasonable man. I am. And you know what's exciting about that is the cost, the illusion of the cost actually is, still hasn't shown up. I keep thinking something terrible is going to happen when I step into like the most outrageous possibilities. Like, for example, I might say something like, I'd like to really go for my dreams and create a level of community and nature connection and culture like that of our ancestors. I'd like that to be my life. And that's actually happening. And there's actually income, believe it or not, that comes into my life for pursuing that crazy question. And there's all these other benefits too, like children are happy around me. Parents are happy around me. Parents have aunties and uncles, not blood, but people of similar worldview, who watch their children with them. They actually have time off. They actually hang out with peers while their kids are being taken care of by people in their 20s who've got energy and enthusiasm and a vision of resilience for these children. And somehow the sum is greater than the parts. So there's all this extra time that's happening all the time. And I create these clusters of abundance and regenerative culture, meaning it's not just like surviving culture where I'm treading water all the time. I don't have time for myself at all, or my friends, or my family, or my children, or my parents, or my community, and someday I will. No. There's actually a surplus on a regular basis. An abundance. How did that happen? Well, those core routines of risk-taking, listening, asking good questions, doing things with a stretch, right? The stretch of diversity, both in participating in nature with mentors and participating with people like they were nature. So, for example, I believe that I'm much more resilient if I have a lot of people around me who care about my daughter than just me and my ex-wife. How's that sound to you? That make sense? And so, but how do I take the next step, right? Well, I started doing some seeking around, well, who in the world, where are my role models for people who have really deep nature connection and have extended family relationships? And it led me in short order to Native people. In fact, there's a kind of a continuum of something, like of indigenous, because there's North American Indians, right? But even people who've come from other countries are relatively more indigenous than myself. First generation Italian grandmother's got a lot of culture in her and understanding about how to run a big family than my family that I grew up in. So it's kind of a continuum, it's not just black and white. But it's led me to meeting people of other cultures and asking them these questions. So I found out a couple of key tips. You want to know a couple?
Yeah.
All right. So here's this one's really good. So this man named Paul Rayfield, he's a peacemaker in the Odawa Nation as part of the Anishinaabe Great Lakes Tribe Indians. And we met him by accident, but not really, because we put up a poster that we were looking at creating a culture of nature connection and native teachings. And so he thought there were going to be native elders there, and so he came looking for native elders. But we found we're two people seeking, And so we met at the river. And he had been losing his culture by the day and not having a plan for how to get it back. And we had lost it a long time ago, piecing together a map called What Would It Look Like Ideally If We Had One? Mm-hmm. So we were theoretically building a map, and he had embodied experience that was disappearing by the day, because he grew up that way. So when we came together, he was like, oh, I recognize that part of the map. That's called my childhood. I recognize that. We didn't call it tracking, though. It's just something we did. And then all these stories would come pouring out of him, because we'd say, oh, there's this principle, it's called Story of the Day. We noticed that in indigenous cultures around the world, when kids would come home, it wasn't just like, what's for dinner? They'd get 100 questions from the aunties or the grandmothers or whoever, being like, so what'd you see out there today? Where were you? Oh, were you over in that gully? Did you see the ginseng growing on the slopes? Where is it up? Is it 1 inch or 2 inch up? Because I want to pay attention to when it's flowering. How many were there? About 50 plants, 100 plants? Those ones that we planted last year to make them more abundant on the north slope? Are they coming up? And so the kids get half the answers. They're like, I can't remember. We're like, go back tomorrow and let me know. So what is that doing for the child? That little relationship there. Stimulating them, right? To actually go back and see and be where they were. but it's also purposeful. It's like an errand. We call it the errand principle, and it's really great somewhere around 8 to 12 years old. It's like, oh, I can help out, right? And I got energy to run all the way out on the landscape for grandma and find out how the ginseng's doing, right? And then to come back with more information. They're like, was that hawk still up in that, oh, I wasn't listening, Could you go back and check out? Because they usually have babies up in that part of the woods up in there, It's a ceremony I want to do. And usually they drop feathers from that tree, so if you could just go back and check, we need the down of one of the chicks, so go and listen and see if you can hear the cries of the baby and watch the mother. She'll come with some food and she'll land in the nest, but she usually does like 3 or 4 hops on quiet branches and then looks around and then goes into the nest, so you're going to have to pay attention. What's happening for the child right now in that relationship? That's that nature mentoring I was talking about, because kids can just play, but when they get that kind of information, it's like, whoa, all day they're checking things that are flying around. Where is that mother hawk with that food, and where are the babies? Right? Creates like this vacuum, this pull for learning, and intense curiosity. And of course, ultimately, they're looking for that fluffy feather, for grandma. But all this learning is taking place. Those questions provoke the senses to take in information. So they become powerful learners. We can have that today if we just apply that principle. We don't actually have to have the ceremony of the feathers of the hawk or the ginseng. We can have this place. But that principle, right? So when we shared with Paul some of these things that we had been tracking, common around the world with different nature-based native folks, he was like, oh yeah, that's actually what happened to me. Like, how'd you know? How'd you know that that's what happened for me? Because that was his personal story, right? And then he would go and tell us all these stories about how he'd go fishing, and there was this old man down there, and he would keep pulling them in deeper and deeper fishing knowledge by asking those kinds of questions till he went from one kind of fish to bigger fish to bigger fish to more bait to how to get the bait to trading for him for more information and more bait and more knowledge and more fishing skills. And this whole time he didn't even realize that he was being mentored. It's just what was, right? Because if someone asks you, how did you learn to fish? You'd be like, I don't know, everyone knows how to fish. But when he saw our map, he was like, whoa, there's actually a methodology to this thing. Blew his mind. Because what's his problem? It was all flowing along nicely till trauma hit. You know what I mean? There was an unconscious competence moving through time for their culture, but then trauma hit. And then it was like blown out of the water. Alcoholism, diabetes, reservation systems, depression, suicide. Those are their top causes of death. Suicide, depression, diabetes, alcoholism. And so teachings are not moving along anymore. And it's just disappearing fast. And so he doesn't have a regenerative plan, right? Doesn't know how it got passed on. He's like a fish that came out of the water and landed on the bottom of the boat. It's like, whoa, where's the water? So when he saw the map, he was completely stoked. He was like, whoa, we can consciously put this back. And we were really excited to have him mentoring us in his actual experiences. Right? So he's been a very powerful mentor for us, and so we built an ally relationship. And that's happened around the world with the Bushmen, Hawaiians, Lakota, Apache, Northwest tribes, people up in the Alps in Europe, all over the place. Kenya, Aborigines in Australia. They're all in the same boat, relatively. And so what I'm really hoping is that we can build some powerful ally relationships globally with this resource called our indigenous ancestry in the living natives right now. Because I think we went on a little experimental journey and it's not quite panning out. You know, Mama's giving us some feedback. You know what I'm saying? Mother Earth is giving us some feedback. You know, I turn up the temperature a little bit. Not sure this is working, she says, you know, like a virus. Gonna turn up the temperature, get rid of the virus, and we'll move on, you know. But, you know, we're at that crossroads. We're going to have to take some risks. We're going to have to do something radically different than what we've done before to change the course. I mean, as radical as a suburban Buffalo boy who had a future of going to college and getting a job and raising a family, aborting the process and going to art school to be a human being, who now spends time with native people bridging cultural maps so we can have a regenerative future for our children. Like that kind of radical choice. We're not in Kansas anymore, Dorothy. You know Einstein? Anyone see that Al Gore movie? What was it called? Inconvenient Truth? He quoted Einstein in there, where he said, Einstein said, we're going to have to use a different type of thinking to get us out of the problem that the original thinking got us into. You know what I mean? So we can't just do more of the same. That just kind of spins the treadmill faster, you know? It's really got to be a totally different thing. So we're probably as far away as nature connection we've ever been as a species. Like I said, we've produced the softest children we've ever have in the history of human beings. So nature connection as like a inspirational story is often a non-starter for people. They're just like, so what do you do for a living? You know, I was in line once at a, there was a theater opening, and so like all the funder type people were in the room, you know, and they had the fancy hors d'oeuvres out, and I was in line with them, and guy turns to me, he's like, he's really gregarious, it's a really great night, everyone's happy, he's like, so what do you do for a living? I always hate that question, because it's like, how do I say this like in 2 seconds? And I said, well, I do nature connection for children and adults, so we can have a healthy future. And he's like, oh. And I said, what do you do? And he says, I'm a developer. And it was kind of like, end of relationship. So, Einstein, you know, it's a really brilliant thing, because I think there's a tendency to not want to change that much. You know, there's a tendency like, can I just do a little bit more of the same, just a little faster, or just kind of a little bit to the left, or a little bit to the right? Do I really have to change that much? You know? I really like my bubble. I really like my comfort zone. And the answer is, yes, you are going to have to change that much to have the future you want for your children. You're going to have to give something up. Some convenience, some comfort. So, nature is a great place to start, because it actually can be fun. It's actually a fun training ground, and it's very indirect. Meaning, like, you don't really have to do anything, you don't have to get anywhere. It's very unlike academia, for example. But it's a very healthy process. It's like the gym. Like 80s was for the gym and exercising, you know? The 2000s is actually nature, an immersion with mentors like Evan, who are provoking like the grandmother. So one time I was in Washington D.C. and I was in the lion's den down there, and there was this young family there, and the children were playing with someone else, and they had some questions about the child that they used to have and isn't available anymore, and what can they do, you know? And I was telling them about the questioning process, you know. And unfortunately, you know, we get patterned into information as education. Unfortunately, you know, it's really not actually how human beings did it for the last 500,000 years, you know. It really wasn't about information. Somehow it got to be about information. But I want to encourage you to think of information as almost like cutting. It's like a cutting process. Look at who it is.
Little pattern interrupt.
It was. I totally lost my train of thought.
Information cutting.
Yeah, information cutting. So, So, we get 12 to 16 years of information, and then, what the survey says is kids leave college and they don't have any common sense. You've seen some of those studies. It's like, new disturbing poll says children, adults actually have no competency to be in the world after all this education. Like, my God, what have we done? It's like David Byrne and Stop Making Sense, How did we get here? Anyway, so the art of being and the art of questioning and the art of living and common sense is decidedly uncommon, right? And that's one of the things that happens in the methodology and programming that Evan's doing. It's really not ever really meant to be a program. It's never meant to teach you anything. It's closer to yoga than it is school. Even though he's using a fancy term like Institute for Wild Intelligence, If he knew tomorrow that 500 people would be deeply nature connected, he'd put a shingle on the door and say, out of business. It's not really what he wants. What he wants is culture. He wants alive people who are healthy and well, and maybe that's our future, because we're getting less global and more local. So there I am in DC with this super powerful lawyer-looking politician couple, and I had this what was it? It was some kind of round object from nature. And I think that's how she was experiencing it. And so she's like, what is it? I said, well, I could tell you, or you could experience it. What would you like? And I knew that 90% of her wanted to say, tell me. Right? But because of this whole talk I just did, she was like, she knew the right answer. She was like, I'll tolerate a few seconds of this, I said, well, tell you what. I'll tell you what it is in a minute. Smell it. She's like, oh. I go, what does that remind you of? She's like, God, what is that? God, I know that. And she's like, honey, smell this. He's like, ah. I'm like, okay, close your eyes. I just feel it. Feel the texture on that thing, and it's like, it's really dynamic texture. It's got all these little ridges in it and everything, and it's got little stuff still stuck in there from the husk that was on there. It's like, wow. She's like, what is it? Like, I said, take it and knock it on the ground for a second. Just hear how hard it is. She's like, wow, it's really hard. And I said, do you want to know what's inside? She's like, yeah. I go over to the table there and grab a rock. I have these rocks on it. She goes over. She's like, she's high heels, right? Over to the table, mini skirt. Like she's now Aboriginal all of a sudden. She grabs this rock, and I said, crush it. She's like, right here, I'm like, yeah. She's like, wow. I said, get this down, right? And she puts it on the ground. She's like, and she's like, oh my God, look what's in here, And I said, wait, don't eat it. I said, smell it. She's like, whoa, that is so strong. That's amazing. Wow, And she's like, what is it? I'm like, do you want to taste it? She's like, ooh, like I don't eat dirty things, right? I said, well, what's just inside this really hard object? It's probably not dirty. So I said, here, I'll take a piece first. I'm like, it's really good. It's wild tasting. She's like, all right, I'll try some. So she puts it in her mouth. She's like, woo, wow, amazing. That was really good. It's like, it's got a creamy, nutty taste to it, and the after flavors are amazing. It's like a fine wine. This is an amazing food, right? So now let's start the whole thing all over again. I had a second one, right? And let's pretend like we didn't do that whole thing. Here's what we normally do with kids. Hey, look at this thing. And you say, what is it? And I go, it's a walnut. I said, how'd that feel? And she was like, painful. That was painful. I said, multiply that times your entire childhood, And it's not your fault. It's really important to have the truth, you know? They say the truth will set you free, but first it'll piss you off. It's not your fault. You're enculturated into that. I don't know whose master plan this was, but I don't think it's working anymore. That's all I'm saying. I want to just pop the bubble, disturb you a little bit. You know, I like to comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable. We made that slogan this past weekend. Because I know we got to get through that in order to make a radically different choice. It's very radical because all the patterning has sent me in a certain direction and it's comfortable. It's just familiar, really. It's not even good, my opinion. It's not even like something I want. But I'm familiar, so I stick to it. So I need other people, that's that team thing, to keep me on my toes. Right? That's why I built this relationship with him, to keep him on his toes, because I know that left to his own devices, he might start bubbling around you all and kind of make the whole thing really nice and comfortable because it's easy. I don't really want a lot of conflict. Let's just keep things simple and organized and, you know, keep the lid on. Right? And the next thing you know, people will be unhappy. You're like, how'd that happen? So I ask him questions. And then I listen. How's it going? What are your goals? Where do you want to go with this? What are your real dreams? What if you were to take a risk on this one? You know, what would you do? Keeps him on his toes, right? Kind of like grandma again. Who wants some of that? Ooh, yeah? You sure?
Yeah.
If I were to draw a line right here, and you all stood up, and I said, if you stepped over that line, two things would happen simultaneously. One is, you would have the vision of your dreams for yourself, your family, your community, and the future generations. Guaranteed. But you'd have to give up everything you knew about yourself and reality and history in order to do it. Would you step over that line?
Definitely.
Yeah.
All right. Because that is the choice in front of you. That is the choice in front of you. I'm not messing around here, am I? But I'm telling you, it's a very fun, joyful experience because I'm alive. The truth is, I don't really like my program for myself. Being all bubbled out. I'm not that happy there anyway. I like being awake and alive and challenged. I really do. It's my favorite way of learning. It's my favorite way. I like not knowing. I hate not knowing. I like not knowing. You know what I mean? You should see my daughter. She is like about 1,000 volts. She is. She's like 1,000 volts. She is full body self-expression. You know? She is a force of nature to be reckoned with. Big time. I have no concerns about her for her future. She grew up this way. Luckily, I got wind of this before I had her. Built an entire auntie and uncle network around her. With very powerful nature mentors. Year in, year out, year in, year out, year in, year out. Just the other day, so she's 10 and a half now. She's turning 11 this spring. And something happened. First, she got her first pair of jeans, and she grew bangs. And I was like, oh, you're growing bangs. Interesting, you know? And then I was like this, in the mirror, every day, you know? You know? I always watch, you know, like, she leads me in my parenting if I'm observant, right? I don't really know what the plan is, because I threw out the old plan, meaning how I was raised, and I basically raised her based on what the map and what she's informing, because I believe that actually the blueprint is alive in her until I squash it. You know what I mean? It's kind of like car seats. Like, kids like to move their bodies, and then we put them in car seats and in front of TV, and then they don't like doing that anymore. We work it out of their system. So, in paying close attention, she's still actually got that electricity going on for her. It has not been communicated to her to shut that down. Pretty sure she's going to be a visionary leader at a young age, based on how the teenagers are turning out. So, she says, the other day, she was talking about icicles, and she was talking about how the boys and the girls were doing different activities with the icicles that they were breaking off the roof. And kind of quickly in this discussion about boys and girls as different, And I was like, oh, this will be an avenue to, so I was asking her, what do you think about the boys in your class, this, that, and everything? She's like, oh yeah, and noticing them more. And I said, what kind of man do you want to have when you grow up? Because, as the woman, you get to choose, right? So what are the qualities in the man that you want to have? And she's like, well, first of all, like no hesitation. I'm like, oh, this is great. She's like, first of all, he needs to have a lot of people around him in a community so that whenever there are times of need, he can draw on lots of different resources. Secondly, I'm like, who says that at 10 years old? Crazy. Secondly, he's got to be able to survive in the woods with just a knife. Third, he needs to be really good at doing things, like solving problems, knowing how to get stuff done with very little things around, and so on. She's like listing all these qualities. I'm like, she's all set, she's all set. I'm really happy about this, I don't know how we got there, but somehow this is her experience, I'm really happy about that. And it's not all roses, but I'm sharing with you the joyful things that have come out of it. One last story I'll tell. I don't even know.
Nah.
Where are we at?
We have 17 minutes until the advertised time of 8 o'clock.
Okay. Once I get going, it's like I could talk all night. So in 2010, I was in my 18th year of marriage. How many people here are married? Over 15 years, anyone? Okay. So it was actually, it was the unraveling of my 18-year marriage in 2010. And it started last year around January. And it wasn't something I was looking forward to, and I didn't want it to happen. I was like, not on the program, And, but it happened. And so I started a free fall, but because of the relationships that I had been building for the last 12 years, I didn't fall down. In fact, it was like I had 20 belay ropes all around me, and wherever I leaned, I was held up emotionally. I had a core group of people who were counseling me on a regular basis around what would the best choices be for me and my family. They were looking with me at what are the shadowy things that led to this demise, and what is the light that I'd like to have in my life going forward? What are the values that I have, the high principles for my daughter going forward? What kind of co-parenting relationship do I want to foster on the highest level? Because that relationship's not going to change, that's still going to be there. What were the strategies that would be a reflection of these high values? They would not let me descend unless it was purposeful, And so what ended up happening was I left my house that I had for 10 years, and a family that I had been mentoring for just as long, 9 years about, a boy I met when he was 8, now he's 17. I led him through his rites of passage when he was 13. His mother was in a transformational adult program with me for several years, and her father, she brought up later on, became an elder in the community at 83. He went from lonely in Connecticut because his wife had passed away to powerful, outspoken, purposeful human being. You never seen a transformation like this. Like, he was sad looking and unintelligible when he spoke. And within 3 years, he's very powerful and direct about how he wants to spend his time. Very clear. about culture and what he wants. It's unbelievable. It's like his blueprint got into place. So the nexus was I needed a place to live, and they wanted to move closer to Vermont, so we decided, like from one day to the next, why don't we all move in together? So now I live with an 83-year-old elder, this powerful woman, this powerful teenage young man, my daughter, and myself. And we have this extended family environment going on. That would be a definition of resilience for me. My daughter is completely happy. She knows all these people. Now she has 2 houses that she lives in. And she's joyful. And I kept waiting for the shoe to drop. Well, when does the child descend into this total unhappy, miserable state? Everyone keeps telling me, this is awful. This is awful for your child. I'm like, it is. I know, it's terrible. And then it never happened. It actually never happened. So I said, maybe doesn't have to be that way. Maybe I can actually believe in a different possibility called life stage transition. You know the data, most people are actually changing their relationships over time. But the question is, what catches them when they make the change? What catches them? So I've decided to share this story as an example of cultural resilience, because no one got kicked out of the village. We just changed chairs, and my daughter is still in the middle being held by the same people. She has a different belief about reality. And you're not going to be able to convince her otherwise. So I wanted to share that with you. It's my latest story. And I wanted to hear from you a little bit of what's stirring, because that's a lot of storytelling. But the way I'm going to do it is I'd like you to speak with the person next. Breathe. Feel. Observations. Anyone have a comment on how it feels? Yeah.
I wish we'd been in a circle the whole time.
Okay.
Completely, yeah.
What's the feeling?
I was in the back of the room, all I saw was backs of heads. There was no light in people's faces, no sense of us together as a group.
I was in the front, and I kept turning around and looking to see who was here. Like, oh, hi, I know these people. So,
I'm actually totally uncomfortable.
Yeah. Who else is uncomfortable? Who else is not saying they're uncomfortable? Why? Can I pick on you
Yeah,
a little
that's
bit?
fine.
So
Yeah.
if you track that a little bit, why do you think you're uncomfortable?
I only know one person in the room. That's probably part of it. And I
Yeah.
barely know.
Yeah. So you're exposed to all the people you don't know? Something like that?
Yeah. It also feels a little bit like one of those weird corporate team building exercises.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you there. Next thing we do is we're all going to put our hands in the middle and make a human knot.
I'll catch you.
Yeah. Trust exercise, ready? I think that's actually why they do those games, is for culture change. One time I did this and somebody said I feel really exposed. Like I almost feel responsible now to participate, whereas before I could just check out. One row only. That's how I like to think of my community. Front row only. Everyone's got a spot, like it or not. What is dangerous about doing this? And I mean that in a creative sense. What's dangerous about this shape?
It's confrontational.
To what?
I have to look at people that I haven't ever looked at.
Yeah, okay, great. Okay, you're forced to build a relationship with those that you don't know yet, I might say. What else is dangerous?
The vulnerable position.
Uh-huh. Vulnerable.
Being looked at myself.
Right.
You're receiving that as well as having to do it.
So what is that in danger for you?
A certain anonymity.
Right. That might be my definition of the bubble. The bubble is endangered, right? Like, you know, when I was in school, I had certain places I sat in the room so I could hide. This is like, ugh, everyone can see me now.
Now, see, this is not nearly as threatening to me as having you say, talk to your neighbor, and you didn't even tell me what to talk about.
I couldn't get to it. You're all so darn chatty.
You know, this is okay. Yeah, so I'm sitting here and I have to look at all these. I don't actually have to like interact with them in any, non-structured way. This is all still very structured. You told us what to do. You put us in the circle. You're talking. Right. You might call on me or not, and that's okay. But so to me, that was more threatening than this.
Cool. Thanks for the tip. I'll do that. I'll do more of that.
So we'll do more of that.
I think though that I think if we had started out like this, I wouldn't have been uncomfortable. Like it was the shift that was uncomfortable.
I agree with you.
But I teach and I sit in circles, so
Yeah.
that's also part of it.
That's a really wise observation that it's the change that's stressful. It's not actually the shape. Right. And when we went back to, the choice line I drew, it's actually not what's on the other side of the line that's upsetting. It's like, actually I like it better. It's the change. It's so dumb on some level. It's just about the change. I was saying to someone, we don't need any more information. You know what I mean? As a species, like we actually don't need any more information. We're like up to here with information. In fact, it's called information sickness now. Too many choices, too much information. What we need is courage. That's the rare commodity. To go through that change to get to this, whatever this is for you. So, we have to wrap up this evening, but I want to thank you because I know that I'm a troublemaker. It's my middle name, Mark Troublemaker Morey. And if you want to be a troublemaker too, hang out with him. I endorse him as a troublemaker. He's a very fun, loving version of troublemaking.